So I could start a lot of series, and I mean a lot of series in 2022. Let's talk about what those could be. Hello, welcome to the Ponderings of Pete. I'm the aforementioned Pete. 2022 is coming up in like 2 days, or tomorrow, or something. I don't know, in a day or so. Time is irrelevant. It's fine. I am a booktuber that talks about fantasy and sci-fi, mostly fantasy, a little bit of nonfiction, some other stuff thrown in there occasionally, but mostly fantasy. And today we're going to talk about what I could be reading in 2022. My friend Grace at Grace Dion, she is a fantastic booktuber that you should go check out. She's Canadian, loves hockey, and loves just thinking, which is great. I know that's a strange thing to say, but she's very thoughtful in what she does. She loves Wheel of Time, too. She's in the middle of reading that. She did a video that was titled roughly around series I want to start in 2022, I believe it was. And it was based off of her physical TBR. Because we booktubers have a habit of buying up series. Specifically, buying up firsts of series is usually the wiser choice. Rather than, buying up the entire series when you find out that it's a thing that you should read. I ended up with 40 different series that I have the first book at least of. I think there's one that I only have the second book of, and that's it. But there's 40 different series. And that's not including my honorable mention. First up is my honorable mention, which is Star Wars. I have a lot of Star Wars books. I have I swear I have 200 or 300 Star Wars books. Most of them from the expanded universe. I'm not going to be listing the series that I haven't started there in this list, because I'm just going to put it here. There's a lot of series there, like Fate of the Jedi, New Jedi Order, Black Fleet Crisis, X-Wing. There's so many different series in there that I may have read one book or two books when I was younger. So I can't conclusively say which series I haven't read yet for the most part. But I do plan on reading them eventually. Hopefully in the next year or so. I'm going to do one Star Wars book a month to start out, and then maybe ramp it up over the times. Maybe do an entire month of Star Wars at some point. I don't know. But I am definitely going to be reading more of it. As for the rest of it all, let's start by talking about some self-published, shall we? The first book I would like to talk about, first series, starts with The Broken Heart of Aurelium. I believe this is a new book. The series hasn't really continued yet, but this is the first book in the series, so I put it on there. This was recently given to me through Secret Santa on Alan's channel by Stephanie B, and I appreciate all the books she sent to me. I think all 3 of them are on this list. But this is a first book by Alex Robbins, and essentially you have one of our main characters is centered around this pit. He is a guard at this pit, and the things that are inside this pit are more than likely going to escape, from what I can tell. There's a few other different things. There's these order of 12 warriors that aren't there anymore, but one of their last knights of the 12 warriors is around or something like that. Sounds super cool. I'm trying to rush through this, so I'm not doing a very good job of explaining what this is about. Try to do better with this. But sounds really interesting. You got epic knights. You got a crazy baddie coming out of the pit, possibly. What more can you want? Next up is Unsold by Will White. This is a progression fantasy, which means the main character gets stronger and stronger and stronger as the series goes on. I've heard some great things about this series. And yeah, I've had it on my shelf for a while. I do want to start it. There might be a few other series I have in line before it, though. I've read maybe one other progression fantasy book, and I wasn't the biggest fan of it. But I have been told that Unsold is a little bit different, so I might like it a little bit better. Next up, PATERNUS, Rise of the Gods. This is by Dirk Ashton. And this is a super epic, interesting series for me, because there's a lot of... I think it takes place in our real world, or maybe I'm just reading into the summary a little bit too much, with references to hospitals and these names that sound super normal. But basically, in the world that it takes place in, which I think is ours, is mythological monsters are coming back. So kind of like a more grown-up Percy Jackson, I think. But less gods, maybe, but just malevolence. It sounds super cool. I love mythological stuff. Sounds right up my alley. I'm excited to get in this series. Well, I probably will say that about a lot of them. Next up, we have our first grimdark entry with We Men of Ash and Shadow by H.L. Tinsey. First book in an entry. I don't know if there's any more in this thing. This is a grimdark gas lamp fantasy. Got some interesting tropes in here, including the investigator, downbeat investigator with a young, who's mentoring this young dude. I don't know if this young person is a cop or not, but he's not a cop technically either, but he's an investigator. So, unlikely mentor, gas lamp, grimdark fantasy thing. So it sounds super cool from what I read. I haven't really read any gas lamp in a while outside of, unless you want to consider Brandon Sanderson's stuff gas lamp with Era 2 Mistborn, but I'm not sure you would consider it that. Anyways, sounds super cool. Got it from Stephanie B for Secret Santa. Let's move on. Next up is a funny one. Immortality Waits by Andrew J. Stillman. So I actually know Andrew. He is at Get Right On In on YouTube. He is a writer. He is a booktuber. He's super cool. I bought this for a certain time period because it was his only book that he had out, and I bought it more of a joke because I wanted to read it. He hates this book. Like, full disclosure, he hates the writing in it and everything. And he's actually rewriting it. So I bought it as sort of like, haha, I'm going to read your terrible writing. So keep an eye out on his other books that are coming out. I don't know when the rewrite's going to come out, but he does have a lot of cool concepts in this book. I believe he's trying to do some elemental type magic, mostly dealt with fire, and you have a demon that feeds on people's depression inside a restaurant, I believe it was. I think. But it sounds cool. But evidently he thinks it's horribly written, so that's why he's rewriting it. So keep an eye out for that. And then we have The Mazes of Magic by Jack Massa. This is kind of an alternate history fantasy type of deal. You have magic and you have history. So this slave, he was kidnapped when he was younger, I believe, and he is trying to escape, and he learns magic somehow. But it happens in, I believe, in Rhodes. Either Rhodes or Alexandria. I can't tell which. So maybe sometime around the same time as Assassin's Creed Origins, if you know what I'm talking about. I don't know. But it sounds cool. There's magic. Egyptian gods, maybe? Ooh. And the last one, I think this is I can't remember, but I believe this is self-published. The Atlantis Gene by A.G. Riddle. This was a recommendation from my friend Michael Nip over on his channel. He raves about A.G. Riddle. This isn't one of the specific ones he raves about, but this is the one I got. I believe I found it in the store, which is rare for self-published, but it's great when you find it there. Essentially, this is the first book in the Origin Mystery series. You have somebody probably discovering something in Antarctica, and then you have an autism researcher discovering some crazy discovery that is somehow linked to this archaeologist dig in Antarctica. Kind of mysterious, end of the world maybe, who knows? Might probably have something to do with Atlantis, which is interesting. Maybe they learn how to just breathe underwater because Atlantis. That'd be cool. But I doubt that's like the biggest thing that's there. Alright, on to the traditionally published things. The first one that I'm going to talk about is A Darkness Forged in Fire by Chris Evans. And no, this is not Chris Evans' Captain America. This is a completely different Chris Evans. Trust me, I checked. What's this about? This is a flintlock fantasy. It's the first book in the Iron Elves series, and yes, it's about elves with guns. Specifically rejected and cast out Iron Elves that go and fight with the human army, and there's some end of the world epic fantasy stuff going on. So I found this in a thrift shop. I was like, oh, this is interesting. Picked it up. It's been sitting on my shelf. Next up, we have Sandstorm by James Rollins. This isn't a fantasy. This is actually more thriller, Indiana Jones type of thing. There's some stuff in here like ancient artifacts, and seems very Indiana Jonesy, Secret Society. Picked it up in the thrift store, and I was like, oh, this looks cool. So it's on my shelf now, just like the last one. Next up, we have The Eyes of God by John Marco. This is the first in the Bronze Knight series. This one was a little bit tricky to figure out what it was actually about because there's a lot of different in the blurbs all over the internet. So essentially, from what I can break down, it's about two guys, a knight and a king. They're super close because of reasons, backstory, and they're trying to make peace for their kingdom. And the princess that the king is supposed to marry takes ill, and they have to go figure out why and find a way to cure her. And it has something to do with something called The Eyes of God. Seems very classic fantasy. Seemed cool. I think I picked this up from Book Depository in one of their sales. I have a few more classical fantasy like this. Speaking of something more classical, we have Dragon Wing by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, first in the Deathgate cycle. I actually have all of the Deathgate cycle because of Kate, the Almost Book Doctor. And, you know, this is kind of, I don't really know that much about what it's about. This is my second attempt at Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman because I wasn't too impressed with Dragonlance, but I'm willing to give them another try when they're in their own non-D&D universe. So, if you want to read this, let me know. And then we have Rune of Kings by Jen Lyons. So this is one that I know is told in an interesting perspective. It's told as a document that's being told by a person that's in jail, and there's footnotes, so it's kind of all over the place. I was excited about this, but I've also heard some not so good things about this, so this is kind of like sunk down there. If you did like this, let me know and tell me why you liked it, because I'd be interested in hearing that. But it's just interesting. I think it's told by like the bad guy, like the guy who's supposed to destroy the world or whatever, which is kind of what intrigued me about it. So if it's done well, I'd be interested in reading it more. But I might read it eventually anyways, just to get it either unhauled or continue on. And then we have another classic fantasy, The Dragonbone Chair by Tad Williams, first in the Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn trilogy. Starts out super simple. A kitchen boy is sent to save the world, because why not? Let's save the kingdom. He's basically on a quest to get these 3 swords, Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. Crazy magic swords, yeah! Kitchen boy that probably is secretly an heir to something. I don't know. It's just classical fantasy, and I've heard some really good things about Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. I do want to get to this at some point. I mean, that's true of all of them, and I have so many just... This video is telling me how many phrases I have that I need to stop using or use them sparingly. Next one, The Declaration of the Rights of Magicians. I actually saw the second one all over the place at Barnes & Noble the other day. When I was going in there, it was calling to me, but I was like, I haven't read the first one, I can't buy the second one, because that was the 50% off sale thing. Declaration of the Rights of Magicians is super interesting to me, actually is interesting to me. Especially coming off Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. It's another alternative history. Similarly, they're trying to get the magic they're trying to get magic legalized. Robespierre makes an appearance, and he's a necromancer, which makes sense because like he killed a lot of people in the French Revolution. He's a necromancer. He kind of needs dead people. So cool, necromancer Robespierre for the win. So this actually does really interesting to me. Another one that I actually have on my actual Excel TBR is Nine Fox Gambit by Yoon Ha Lee, first in the Machineries of Empire trilogy. Actually, the first 2 of these. I've been super excited about this for a while, recommended by Literature Science Alliance. Angela's great. This fascinates me because you have a captain being assisted by an undead captain trying to take an untakeable fortress in space. It's cool. Check out that cover art. That's an actual fortress called like the Thousand Needle Fortress or something like that. Angela was super excited about that, and that kind of transferred it to me. So this is something I'm reading super soon. I think in March is when I decided to start it, but could be wrong. Next up, another random one that I've picked up. It's World's End, the first in the Age of Misrule series by Mark Chadbourne. So what's this one about? Well, it takes place in our world, most certainly, and you have the ancient Celtic gods rise up and decide to take over the world, I think, essentially. Hence the Age of Misrule, but essentially, you know. So I kind of like this concept because this is the second book that on this list that has a similar concept to this. Just books about our world where magic suddenly appears kind of fascinate me first to a certain extent. I don't know why. Moving on, let's talk about Jade City. First book in the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee. So, big thing about this series, I've heard there's a lot of pain in this series, which I'm fine with. It's magical mafia. Jade is your weapon of choice, and it's kind of soft. So, I'm definitely down for this. It just ended, and a lot of people love this series. So, it's one of those ones I'm just like, let's try it out. Only on the first one, though, so we'll see if I like it. And another classical fantasy, Short Sword of Shannara by Terry Brooks. I've actually read the second book in this series already, back when the show first came out, because the show started with the second book, because the first book is kind of a Lord of the Rings lookalike. So I may or may not ever read Sword of Shannara. I may actually continue with the third book eventually, even though I don't have it. I've heard some good things about the Shannara series over time. It's definitely one of those epic fantasy series that I'd like to get to. It's not a huge priority on my list right now, but eventually, yeah, it'd be cool. Jumping into Red Mars with some sci-fi. Red Mars is the first in the Mars trilogy by Kim Stanley Robinson. And this is a series that I saw my brother read it years and years and years ago, and I wasn't interested, and then I read the synopsis. It's basically about humans terraforming Mars. You have Red Mars, I believe it's Blue Mars, and then you have Green Mars. Interesting hard science. I believe it's a hard science fiction novel. So this will be interesting when I get to it, especially if I want to start reading more sci-fi, which I do. Next one was recommended to me by a friend. I really want to get to this one in the next couple months. That is Jumper by Steve Gould. You might recognize this book because it was a movie back in the day. And by back in the day, I probably mean like 10 years ago. Basically, it's about people that have the ability to teleport anywhere they want. And it's a series that comes to me recommended. Definitely looking forward to this. I found this in a thrift store at one point, and I was like, yes, finally. Speaking of more thriller-esque books like Jumper, Born Identity by Robert Ludlum. This is another thrift store find. I've been looking for this because I've been looking to actually read some more thrillers just to get a sense for that style of writing. Because I think writing some fantasy thrillers would be super fun. So yeah, if there's any other thrillers that you'd love me to read, let me know. Because I'd be down eventually to start reading them, and then writing them, hopefully. If you don't know what this is about, it's about a master assassin that lost his memory, essentially. Worked for the CIA, lost his memory, and now he has to recover it. And there's like 20-some books. It's crazy. Next up, we have one that was gifted to me by someone on Discord, and that is The Three-Body Problem by Liu Zixin. I don't actually know how to pronounce his name, and it's terrible, but it's fine. I'm kind of at odds with this because of some of the author's political views, specifically around China, because he is a Chinese author, and I'm not a big fan of China. But, you know, what can you do? I've heard this is a really good hard science book, which is, fascinates me so, and I didn't, actually buy the book from a book outlet or anything like that, or a bookstore, so I didn't actually contribute money to the author, which is great, because I really don't want to give any money to this guy because of his views. At some point, I would like to read this because hard sci-fi. I just want to get into sci-fi a little bit more. I think that's, a typical thing to go into. Next up, we have The Age of Myth by Michael J. Sullivan. This is the same guy that wrote the RECLUCE series, which I will be continuing and finishing this year. It actually is set in the same world as the RECLUCE Chronicles, and basically it's about people and humans and different races. They have gods, or equivalent of gods, and then one day one of them is killed. So thus begins a very bloody war, I would assume. This is actually a 6-book series. I have 3 of them because I think I got them on sale and they were signed by an author. I was like, oh, this is dope. So I want to get into this, but I'm going to finish the RECLUCE Chronicles, I believe it's called, first. Finish up those 3 books, 3 bind-ups that I have, and then continue on and see where we go from there. Next up, the first is Homeland, and this is the Dark Elf trilogy by R.A. Salvatore. This is just Drizzt. That's what it is. This is Forgotten Realms. This is a classical, it's not classical, but it's definitely a classic, because it's not as tropey to my knowledge, but it's definitely shows you the influence of role-playing games on fantasy literature. This is the most direct influence you could have, probably, just like the Dragonlance Chronicles. I want to give this a go because I've heard it's really good. I have the entire series because I found a box set. So, let's do this. Another random book that just happened to be on my bookshelf at some point. The Last Stormlord by Glenda Lark. This is the first book in the Watergivers series. Kind of sounds like a desert type planet ish, but these Stormlords are actually able to manipulate weather and bring rain to their country, that sounds like an interesting ecological magic system that might have some really cool stuff in it. There's like 3 different protagonists, one of which is a full-blown Stormlord, so you don't have to worry about the whole oh my gosh, gradually discovering this magic system through the eyes of the trainee. Rocky. Woohoo. To my knowledge. I don't know. But it sounds like an interesting series, so I picked it up. Next up, we have The Tiger and the Wolf by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is a really interesting series because it's about shapeshifters. You have werewolves, you have weredeer, you have were-tigers, crazy stuff. Just shifters. It's about shifter society, which is really cool. Reminds me of another story that I tried writing when I was younger about weredeer taking over the US, but that's just a completely different crazy wild thing. But yeah, another Agent Tchaikovsky. I've been reading some of his books this past year, and I have enjoyed them. So at some point, I definitely will be getting to this. Live Ship Traders trilogy. I have all of these because I intend on reading all of them. This is just going to be my general Robin Hobb entry. It's Robin Hobb, pain, hype, talking ships. Yeah! You'll hear more about this. Definitely. The Black Company by Glenn Cook. Pain, camaraderie, battles told in a weird way. Yeah, Black Company, one of the inspirations for Steven Erikson in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. Heard a few good things about this, even though I know the first book is kind of crazy and kind of hard to get through. But I'm going to do it at some point. Maybe. Eventually. But I have the first book, so I'm ready. Another classical fantasy, Magic of Recluse by L.E. Modesitt Jr. I think that's how you pronounce it. Magic of Recluse is a really, really, really long, I think it's like 22 book series that might be split out into separate series, kind of like Realm of the Elderlings. I don't know. I know next to nothing about this series. I've seen a lot of the books around. I know it's older. I know it's more classical fantasy. You have somebody in magic and all this other jazz. I don't actually know that much about it. But it literally has a very similar style, like the old Wheel of Time covers and stuff. So it's there for when we want to. For when I want to, crack into it. Next up, more Grimdark. Specifically, Grimdark from our Lord Grimdark himself, Joe Abercrombie. We have The Blade itself, book 1 of the First Law series. Recently bought this one because I know I'm going to get into it at some point. A lot of people on BookTube love this series to death. So of course I want to get into it. Specifically, the second series, I believe it's called the Age of Madness series, is something that I love the concepts of and I want to get to. And then, no, it's actually his third series. But, got to get through First Law first, which sounds pretty interesting. But I'm definitely more interested in Age of Madness. So this will be great. I'm looking forward to get to know Glokta and all the other characters that I've heard about. Next, we'll come to some giants with Plague of Giants by Kevin Hearn. First book in the Seven Kennings series. You know what I know about this? There's giants, there's an invasion, there's a bard that is a bard? I don't know, he's crazy. But there's a bard in it, which you don't see much in modern fantasy, which is the interesting thing outside of maybe, The Witcher. I've heard it has a super cool magic system. There's a lot of different giants, a lot of different types of giants, which is one fantasy race that isn't explored enough in fantasy nowadays. So, uniqueness is a plus. Leslie at the Nerdy Narrative said it was awesome, so that's a strong recommendation from her. Excitement. Continuing on, we have CHERRYH by Stephen Brust. First in the Vlad Taltos series. From what I can tell online, he wanted to make it so you can enter this series anywhere. There's maybe 1 or 2 bad entries to start with. But that's an interesting concept. But I have a bind-up of like 3 or 4 books, which is dope. All I really know is it's about a wisecracking assassin. And it's fantasy. So I got this from Book Depository. Didn't know that much about it, but it's there. If you like this series, tell me why you like it so I can know more. That's honestly the biggest, recommendations that I can get is tell me more, tell me more. Here we have a gas station purchase. Yes, you can find fantasy at gas stations. It's weird. Elsewens by Melanie Ron. This is actually the second book. The first one is called Touchstone. I'm probably going to buy Touchstone at some point because this is such an interesting concept. Essentially, it's about a magical theater troupe that travels. You don't see that as a central theme to a fantasy series that often unless you're playing D&D or maybe, your parents died and they were from a magical theater trope. Yes, I'm talking about Name of the Wind. I mean, they weren't magical, were they? But anyways, usually the theater troupe is in the tragic backstory, not the actual central theme of the series. So yeah, I saw this. I was interested. I bought it. But it's the second book. But I'll buy the first at some point. Next up, one that I'm actually starting next month in January. N.K. Jemisin, The Fifth Season, first of the Broken Earth trilogy. Another one that was recommended by Angela at the Literature Science Alliance. I don't know that much about the plot, to be honest. I know that there's POV in second person. I know that it has something to do with constant apocalypses happening, hence the fifth season is Apocalypse Season, which is kind of metal. But that's about it. So, going in blind, which is kind of cool. I like going in blind things. City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, and I'm sorry. I can't do it. First book in the David trilogy. Another booktube darling that's on here. Yeah, you get Jinn, and there's magic that's based around Jinn, and you have a girl that is going in and she enters the court, I think. It's kind of YA. A lot of the stuff about this series is kind of like flown through my brain. I can't really describe it, but it's there, and I'm excited to read this one just because it has such a different magic system. It's not European based, it's not Draconic based, it's based off of Jinn. So I've seen it explored in a few other places, and I've liked it, so we'll see how this author handles it. Another classical fantasy, we have The King's Dragon by Kate Elliott. I'm pretty sure this is the first book in whatever long series she's done with this. From what I can tell, there is a civil war going on in this country, in this place, and yeah, that's about all I know. There's dragons, which is kind of dope. Dragons are dope, guys. It's fantasy. Love you, dragons. Then we have another classical fantasy entry, and that is DRAGONQUEST by Anne McCaffrey. This is kind of fantasy, kind of turns a little bit sci-fi in the end, but there's dragon riders, which is great. I love me some dragon riders ever since I read Aragon as a kid. So this is kind of like one of those things that I have to get to eventually, that I really should get to. So I have the first one. Hopefully I'll buy more once I get it. Another one I got, I think it feels a little more feels a little sci-fi, feels a little bit fantasy. The Faded Sun trilogy by C.J. CHERRYH. I don't know actually pronounce his name as indicated. This is about a race of people that it follows, I think, 3 of them. They are the Mri, I believe it's pronounced, and humans have essentially wiped out most of them, but they have to learn how to exist alongside humans, at least the ones of their society that are still alive. So kind of imperialistic, kind of interesting. So I bought the bind-up of this a while back, or some months back, part of a book depository, because it's like, oh, this looks cool. A library find, because the library was selling this, Shadow of the Torturer by Gene Wolfe. So I know this is more classical, and I know it's a dark series. I mean, it's called Shadow of the Torturer. You have Darkness of the Edginess as the title, so it's got to be kind of dark. Really short book. Picked this up because I'd heard of it. I know it's a series that a lot of people that a lot of classical fantasy fans love. So cool. It's one I want to eventually get to, like everything else on this list. But it has piqued my interest. So if you love it, tell me why. If you hate it, tell me why. I mean, if you love or hate any of these books, tell me why. Next up, we have a YA sci-fi by the one, the only, the GOAT, Sando himself, Brandon Sanderson. We have Skyward. I have not read any of this series. I wanted to in January, didn't get to it because I barely read any books last January. Hopefully that's going to change this January, but he just came out with the 3rd book. He's releasing novellas. Book 4 is coming out in 2023. I might binge this series before 2020 when the 4th one comes out, but I definitely have the first 2 sitting on my bookshelf, and I'll probably buy up the 3rd one and the bind up of the 3 short stories at some point as well. Who knows? But I've heard good things about this, and it's Brandon Sanderson, who I really like. Second to last one, we have Dinosaur Lords by Victor Milan. This is one of the ones that's like, typically described as like, it's the next Game of Thrones, but with Jurassic Park. And from what I can tell, that's semi-accurate based on the description. Essentially, it's a fantasy world where dinosaurs exist, and dinosaurs are the main weapons of war, which is dope. Haven't really heard that much about this series. Saw the title, looked at the blurb, picked it up. It's here for me when I want to read it. And finally, 41 later, 42 actually, which is the meaning of the life, the universe, and everything, so I'm happy. The Last Wish by Andre something. I can't pronounce his name. This is the first Witcher book. I've heard good things. I've heard bad things. People love the video game. At some point I'd like to read this. It's not a huge priority. I might actually watch the show before I read the books. Or play the video game, because I haven't played the video game, and I probably need to, because I know people love it. Maybe after some Assassin's Creed, maybe after the Borderlands. Who knows? But I have it. It's here for me to start when I want to. And that's all. Whew, that was a lot of books. And editing me hates me right now, because I have to put every single one of those on the screen, as you just saw. What did you guys think? Have you read these books? Tell me what you think of them. Did you hate them? Did you love them? Please tell me. I like hearing about things. If you like this video, go ahead and like, subscribe. If any of these sounded interesting to you from the brief little crazy blurbs that I gave, you can look at them down below. If I have affiliate links, I'll get a small subscription thing. I'll get a small percentage of whatever you get down below, which, you know, helps go to my fund of trying to buy a house. Which won't be soon, but it'll be eventually. But I'll change the background then too, and it'll be great. I'll have my own studio, maybe. We'll see. Thanks for watching, guys. Get some rest, because that's important. And yeah, you're awesome.